Think about the last time a piece of media terrified you so badly that you actually found yourself checking over your shoulder in your own house.
Oh, yeah, like your completely safe, locked door house.
Exactly. Your logical brain knows you are totally secure. You know the doors are locked. You know you're literally just looking at words on a page or, light projected onto a screen.
Right, but your nervous system completely ignores that.
Right. It reacts as if a predator is standing right behind you in the dark. And so the question is, how does that happen?
It's a physiological hack.
It really is. How does a writer or a director completely bypass your rational mind and hack your brain's operating system to trigger a genuine physiological fear response? Today, our mission in this deep dive is to dissect the absolute architecture of terror.
We've got a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
We really do. We are going to examine this massive stack of materials to figure out exactly how horror is constructed from the ground up. We are starting with the grassroots, fundamental mechanics of writing audio horror. We're looking specifically at some incredible Reddit threads where creators and fans have meticulously analyzed the narrative structures of massive hit shows.
Shows like Lore, the Magnus Archives, and the No Sleep podcast.
Yes, those exact ones. And from there, we are going to trace that exact same DNA of a scare all the way up to a $28 million blockbuster.
Right, because we are doing an exhaustive breakdown of the 2024 horror film Smile 2.
Such a wild movie.
Oh, it's incredible, because what is truly fascinating here is how the foundational blueprint of fear remains remarkably consistent.
Yeah, that really doesn't change.
Right, the mechanics of dread don't change whether they're being typed onto a script, or whispered directly into your ears through a podcast, or just blasted at you through the surround sound of a massive movie theater.
The tools just get louder.
Exactly. The tools get louder, and the manipulation gets way more sophisticated.
So we are going to trace how modern creators use deep character work, layered audio design, and the very real psychological concept of trauma to build inescapable nightmares.
It's all about weaponizing adrenaline.
Totally. Whether you are an aspiring writer wanting to understand pacing, or a horror fan wondering why certain movies burrow under your skin, or just someone fascinated by human psychology, this deep dive will give you the cheat codes to understand exactly how your own fear is being used against you.
It's a profound exploitation of human psychology, honestly.
Yeah.
But to understand how a massive film like Smile 2 achieves that, we actually can't start with the screen.
No, we have to start smaller.
Right, we have to look at the blank page, the fundamental building blocks.
The blueprint of fear. So looking through our sources, there is this highly illuminating Reddit discussion centered around Aaron Mahnke's writing style on the show Lore.
Oh yeah, the framing technique.
Exactly. A user was asking the community how to mimic his specific rhythm for a school paper, and the fans broke down what they call his framing technique. And it's so simple, but devious.
It really is a trap.
It is. The writer introduces a completely abstract idea at the very beginning of the piece, like something philosophical or a proverb. The example the source uses is the phrase, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep others warm."
Which is, a classic piece of modern therapy speak.
Right, general life advice.
But when you place it at the beginning of a horror narrative, it stops being advice. It becomes a psychological anchor.
Because they pivot so fast.
Exactly. The writer states this abstract proverb and then immediately pivots away from it to tell a seemingly unrelated, highly detailed historical story.
So as the listener, you just get swept up in the narrative.
Yeah, you completely forget about the opening phrase. You are following dates, names, escalating tragic events. But then, right at the grim conclusion of the historical tale, the writer seamlessly connects the horrifying reality of what just happened back to that exact opening phrase.
It creates a closed loop.
A perfect circle.
By the time the end arrives, you realize that the random philosophical intro actually relates perfectly and terribly to the gruesome conclusion. It makes the chaos of the horror feel almost inevitable.
Right, like it was destined to happen from the very first sentence.
Yeah, and you just couldn't see the trap closing.
It bypasses our logical defenses because it frames the horror as a fundamental law of the universe.
Wow. Yeah.
When you use a framing device like that, you are telling the listener, well, this isn't just a random tragedy. This is a strict moral rule of the cosmos that this person violated.
And our brains love that.
We crave it. The human brain desperately craves pattern recognition and meaning. By tying a chaotic event to a neat proverb, the writer satisfies the brain's desire for a pattern while simultaneously delivering a massive dose of dread.
It creates a profound sense of cosmic weight. And that desire for pattern recognition brings us to another incredible source in our stack.
The Magnus Archives analysis.
Yes. A Reddit user breaks down what they view as the rigid six-step anatomy of an episodic horror statement in that show. And it is incredibly precise.
It's like a surgical procedure.
It really is. The first step is just a normal opening sentence, but it contains a very subtle hint of the unusual. It doesn't scream monster.
Right, no jump scares yet.
No, it just introduces a detail that is slightly off-kilter.
And that subtle incongruity is vital. Because if a story starts with a werewolf kicking down the door, your brain immediately categorizes it as fiction.
And the fear response is just gone.
Completely blunted. But if the story starts with a man mentioning that the dimensions of his office feel like they've shifted by half an inch.
Oh, that's creepy.
Right. Your amygdala, the fear center of the brain, is activated in a very different way. It demands investigation. It creates a lingering unease because it mimics the real-world feeling of your intuition telling you something is wrong.
Before you can even articulate what it is. Okay, then we hit step 2. Within the first 5 sentences, the writer must establish exactly why the speaker is giving the statement and to whom.
Grounding it in bureaucracy.
Yes. It immediately grounds the story in a mundane reality. It's not a spooky ghost story around a campfire. It's a dry deposition being given to an archivist in a basement.
Which is brilliant because bureaucracy is the ultimate antithesis of the supernatural.
You just assume it's boring.
Exactly. By encasing the horror in filing cabinets and official forms, the writer lowers your guard. You think, well, if this is an official record, it must be grounded in facts.
And that naturally leads into step 3.
Right. Laying down the background information, the setting, the speaker's mundane life, it just further solidifies that false sense of boring reality.
And then the trap springs?
Step 4.
Step 4 is what the source affectionately labels the shit hits the fan moment.
The whiplash.
The whiplash, exactly. But what I found fascinating in the breakdown is that there must be an equal focus on what the supernatural entity is doing and how the affected person is desperately trying to deal with it. The horror isn't just the monster.
The horror is the human reaction.
Yes, because the monster itself is often unknowable.
Right. You can't empathize with a creature made of shadow or, like, a sentient hallway.
But you can intimately empathize with the panic of a human being trying to run away when their legs won't work.
Or someone frantically trying to rationalize why there are extra teeth in their sink. The physiological panic of the narrator acts as a mirror for you, the listener.
So after the whiplash, we have step 5. That's the escape, or at least a temporary lull in the danger. Which makes sense because it explains how the person is even alive to sit in the chair and give the statement.
It's a functional necessity.
Right. But step 6 is the real psychological masterstroke. The story ends with a grounded follow-up from the archivist character, who actively denies or fails to confirm any of the supernatural elements the listener just heard.
The denial mechanism.
Yeah.
The Reddit analysis points out that this perfectly mimics our own human impulse to compartmentalize fear. When we hear something terrifying, our immediate defense mechanism is to say, well, that can't be real.
There's a logical explanation.
Exactly. And having the in-universe authority figures say those exact words validates your own skepticism. But it simultaneously undermines it, because you just spent 30 minutes viscerally experiencing the terror.
You felt it.
Right, so it leaves you in a state of cognitive dissonance, suspended between logic and primal fear.
We see a totally different approach to this audio manipulation in another source we have here. It's a deeply meta sample script from the No Sleep podcast, written by Olivia White.
Oh, this script is fascinating.
It is. It was literally designed to teach aspiring writers how to write specifically for an audio medium. So it's packed with these intense, capitalized directions meant purely for the producers. Things like crackling fire or the sound of rain and footsteps echoing across a wooden floor.
It just reveals how much heavy lifting the sonic environment actually does. It really does.
The script includes descriptive text that you will never actually hear spoken aloud. It describes the mood, the weight of the air, the specific quality of the silence between words.
Instructing the audio engineers.
Exactly. Instructing them on how to sculpt the emotional resonance of the scene using only frequencies and pacing.
But what's crazy is that the script itself is also surprisingly hilarious in a very dark way.
Very dark.
The plot of this sample features David Cummings, the actual host of the show, and Olivia herself acting as his strangely murderous assistant. An unnamed, hopeful author comes in to pitch a script, and because he forgets the cardinal rule that submissions have to be horror,
she kills him.
She literally murders him with a chainsaw on mic. And then she casually reminisces about having previously set another real-life writer, Jimmy
Mhm.
Giuliano, on fire simply because he looked at a dog funny.
Which is so unhinged. But the inclusion of dark, absurd comedy in a tutorial about horror writing might seem counterintuitive, but it actually serves a vital function.
Comedy acts as a psychological release valve. If a narrative is a constant, unrelenting barrage of terror, your brain eventually goes numb. It shuts down the fear response to protect itself.
Oh, like sensory overload.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by injecting dark humor, the writer forces you to relax, to chuckle, to drop your shoulders, and the very second you relax,
The next scare hits infinitely harder.
exactly, it opens you up for the punch.
Okay, I understand the theory, but I need to challenge this whole concept of rigid structure for a second.
Go for it.
If we look at this exact six-step Magnus anatomy or the predictable proverb looping device of lore, isn't it just inherently formulaic?
You mean predictable.
Yeah. If I'm an avid listener and I subconsciously know exactly when the whiplash moment is coming, or I know the ending is going to loop back to the intro, doesn't the formula ruin the scare? How do writers prevent us from just seeing the puppet strings being pulled?
That is the exact trap that catches amateur writers,
Yeah.
actually. They mistake the structure for the story itself.
But it's not.
No, the structure is not the story. The structure is a Trojan horse.
Oh, you mean the formula is just the delivery mechanism?
Precisely. The formula is purposefully designed to create that false sense of security we talked about, because you intuitively recognize the rhythm of the narrative, the opening hint, the background, the escalation. Your brain relaxes its critical faculties.
You think, I know how this goes, I am safe here.
Yes. But the true weapon, as the Reddit sources heavily emphasize, is the character's voice. The specific, idiosyncratic, deeply flawed voice of the narrator is the beautiful wooden horse that hides the soldiers.
So while I'm looking at the paint job on the horse, I'm not noticing the trap door opening beneath me.
Exactly. One user in the thread points out that the real joy of the Magnus Archives is that each statement offers a completely different psychological flavor.
Right.
And only a fraction of that is the actual supernatural spookiness. They cite examples like a gritty, thuggish criminal guy from one episode, or a desperately self-justifying philanthropist from another.
Anchoring it in reality.
Right. The rigid six-step structure is anchored so deeply in messy, contradictory human reality and specific personality quirks that you are entirely focused on psychoanalyzing the narrator or judging their decisions. The humanity distracts you from the formula.
To illustrate that perfectly, there is a brilliant moment in the Reddit thread where the original poster pitches a hypothetical story to fit the Magnus mold.
Oh, the Hawaii pitch.
Yes, they suggest a story based around a supernatural entity called the Hunt. But instead of placing it in a gothic castle or a dark forest, they place it in a deeply impoverished part of Hawaii.
A total setting shift.
Totally. The protagonist is just a regular guy who gets caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, winds up on the wrong side of the law, and accidentally becomes an avatar for this supernatural hunt simply because he is cornered and desperate.
And that completely reframes the nature of the terror. It grounds the supernatural in a gritty, socioeconomic, painfully real-world scenario.
It's not just a monster chasing him.
No, the fear in that story isn't just a magical monster. It is about the very real, suffocating fear of poverty. It's about systemic entrapment, the desperation of being cornered by the justice system, and the horrible things a person will do when they have no options left.
The supernatural element is merely a metaphor for systemic oppression that eventually grows literal teeth.
Perfectly said.
So, we've explored how pacing, rigid structure, and deeply grounded character voices construct fear on the page and in our headphones. We know how the blueprint works.
We have the foundation.
Right. The next logical step is to see what happens when those exact same principles, that steady, inevitable escalation of mundane reality into absolute madness, are handed a $28 million budget and projected onto a massive movie screen.
Which brings us to October 2024 and director Parker Finn's sequel, Smile 2.
Oh man, this movie is a sensory assault.
It really is relentless.
Let's establish the baseline for you listening. Smile 2 follows a global pop star named Sky Riley, who is played phenomenally by Naomi Scott. When we meet her, she is preparing for a massive, high-stakes comeback tour following a highly publicized tragedy.
Right, a really dark past.
Yeah, a year prior, she was in a horrific car crash that killed her boyfriend, which subsequently spiraled into severe substance abuse issues and a stint in rehab.
And the film builds directly on the ruthless mythology established in the first film. The core antagonist is the smile entity.
And it is brutal.
It is a parasitic demon that infects a host and torments them with escalating, hyper-realistic hallucinations for about a week. It essentially shatters their psychological immune system.
Just breaking them down.
Exactly. Once their mind is completely broken, the entity possesses their physical body, forces them to contort their face into a deeply unnatural, sinister smile, and compels them to commit a gruesome suicide.
But the catch in the engine of the entire franchise is that the suicide must be performed in front of a witness.
Right. That traumatized witness then becomes the new host.
The trauma is the transmission vector, which means we actually have to address a specific point of fan confusion highlighted in one of our Reddit sources regarding how the curse actually transferred between the two movies.
The Joel to Lewis problem.
Exactly. At the end of the first film, the curse is passed to a police officer named Joel. But when Smile 2 begins, the main host right before our pop star Sky is a low-level drug dealer named Lewis. The fans are asking, wait, how did it get from a cop to a drug dealer?
Right. If the rules say it has to be a suicide in front of a witness, did Joel just walk up to a dealer and kill himself?
Exactly.
It is a crucial mechanical question, and Parker Finn answers it with a breathtakingly chaotic, unforgiving, one-take opening sequence.
It's so intense.
The camera does not cut, which traps the audience in the perspective. We see Joel desperately trying to cheat the system. The first film established a terrible loophole. You don't necessarily have to commit suicide to pass the curse.
Oh, right, the murder loophole.
Yes. If you murder someone else in cold blood in front of a witness, the trauma of that murder will also pass the parasite to the witness. Joel, trying to retain some shred of morality, figures if he has to murder someone to survive, he might as well kill a violent criminal.
A vigilante transfer? He's trying to weaponize the demon against bad people?
Exactly. It is a rational plan born of extreme desperation. But the chaos of reality intervenes. It goes horribly wrong in a bloody shootout. Joel accidentally kills a different criminal than he intended, and it turns out the drug dealer Lewis, who Joel didn't even know was in the building, was hiding in the room.
Oh, wow.
Lewis watches the horrific bloodshed unfold. He becomes the accidental sole surviving witness to a gruesome murder.
So Lewis inherits the curse as a completely innocent bystander to Joel's failed plan.
Right. And Joel, realizing he just doomed an innocent man, tries to flee the house, steps out into the street, and is instantly violently bisected by a speeding truck.
It is a brutal sequence that establishes immediately that the entity does not care about your plans or your morality.
It has its own agenda.
So Joel is dead, but the curse is now ticking inside Lewis. 6 days later, our pop star protagonist, Sky Riley, desperate for painkillers for her injured back and trying to avoid her doctors, sneaks out to buy from Lewis.
And her timing is terrible.
The worst. She walks into his apartment right at the climax of his parasitic cycle. She watches him seize up, smile that terrible smile, and smash his own face in with a heavy barbell plate. Boom. The curse is transferred to Sky.
If we step back and analyze this through the villain's wiki data provided in our sources, it reveals an important underlying philosophy about the rules of the smile entity.
What's that?
It does not operate like a traditional movie monster with a vendetta.
Yeah.
It operates remarkably like a living biological virus.
Just spreading without malice.
Well, it is a chain of trauma that absolutely requires a host and a witness to reproduce. The entity doesn't just want to kill its host. Death is merely the mechanism of reproduction. It needs the host to irrevocably infect someone else before they expire.
It's essentially a psychic pyramid scheme. You are infected with an unbearable debt of trauma, and the only possible way you can buy your own freedom is by forcing that exact same debt onto someone completely innocent.
That is the brutal, paralyzing paradox at the heart of the franchise. The only known way to save yourself, as established by a Brazilian man mentioned in the lore and a character from the first film, is to intentionally murder someone in front of a witness.
Which is horrifying.
Your physical survival absolutely requires the death of your own humanity. You have to become a monster to survive the monster.
It's a devastating psychological dilemma, but to make a concept that dark actually resonate with an audience for 2 hours, you need a compelling victim.
You need a great character voice.
Exactly. Just as the Magnus Archives advice prioritized a grounded character voice to make the formula work, Smile 2 rests entirely on the psychological weight carried by its protagonist.
This is where Naomi Scott's performance elevates the material.
She is incredible.
Collider praised it as one of the best horror performances of recent years, and it is largely because she isn't just playing a screaming victim. She is playing the fragile superstar shell. She has to portray someone who is already acting.
Right. The pop star persona is essentially a suit of armor that is entirely made of glass. She completely embodies this luxurious, highly manicured, hyper-managed life, but it's all a desperate mask.
The code switching is a huge part of that.
Yes, the Collider article specifically highlights her ability to code switch. When she is around her adoring fans, or when she's forced into a room with the head of her record label, Darius, she instantly molds herself into a terrified people pleaser.
There's a specific brilliant moment mentioned in the source where she walks into Darius's office and greets him with this incredibly high-pitched, uneasy, breathless hi.
I remember that.
That single syllable, that hi, is a masterclass in establishing entrapment. Underneath the expensive clothes and the glamour, she is a woman struggling to hold on to her sanity, but she is contractually obligated not to show a single crack.
She has to keep the machine running.
Right. Her mother, who also serves as her manager, is constantly hovering, monitoring her every move. Skye isn't treated as a human being who survived a trauma. She is an asset. She's a highly lucrative product that needs to be kept on schedule.
And the anchor to all her underlying suppressed trauma is the car crash from the year prior. Her actor boyfriend, Paul Hudson, died in the passenger seat. Here is a fantastic piece of meta-trivia from our sources.
Oh, the casting detail.
Yes, Paul is played by Ray Nicholson. He was deliberately cast by director Parker Finn as a direct visual homage to his father, Jack Nicholson, specifically referencing Jack's iconic, terrifying descent into madness in The Shining.
Finn stated he cast him simply because in certain lighting, he looks exactly like Jack.
It's wild. The resemblance is uncanny, and it imports a subconscious cinematic baggage of masculine madness and isolation into the film.
It does. But the dark truth of that car crash is what truly gives the entity its leverage over Skye.
Because she's hiding something.
Exactly. Through fragmented flashbacks, the audience learns the horrible secret Skye has been hiding. She wasn't just a tragic victim in that crash, she caused it.
Oh, man.
They were in the middle of a violent, drug-induced argument. Paul was mockingly screaming at her, and in a moment of sheer rage, Skye lashed out and yanked the steering wheel. She killed him. The guilt is eating her alive, but she is forbidden from speaking about it.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because this was a major point of discussion before the movie came out.
Sure. What is it?
The first movie, Smile, centered around a clinical therapist, someone very grounded, very everyday, dealing with normal, relatable work stress. Why pivot so drastically and make the protagonist of the sequel a massive global pop star living in a penthouse?
Doesn't it alienate the audience?
Yeah. Doesn't elevating her to this untouchable, wealthy celebrity status risk alienating the average audience member sitting in the theater?
It is a completely valid concern. But when you analyze the thematic core of the franchise, fame actually amplifies the horror in a way an everyday setting cannot.
Really? How so?
Think about it. What is the fundamental concept of the Smile universe? It is the horror of the mask. It's about the agonizing friction between hiding severe internal trauma behind a socially acceptable, pleasant exterior.
Oh, wow. The pop star is the ultimate manifestation of the forced smile.
Exactly. As a pop star embarking on a comeback tour, Skye is quite literally, contractually obligated to smile. She is legally bound to perform happiness, vitality, and sex appeal for her fans, for the cameras, and for her mother manager.
So it's not a departure from the theme.
Not at all. The celebrity angle does not diminish the theme. It literalizes it. It takes the everyday, relatable human experience of pretending you are okay when you're internally falling apart, and it projects it onto a global stadium-sized stage.
It highlights the intense, suffocating isolation of public trauma.
Right. You can be standing in a room surrounded by thousands of people screaming your name in adoration and be completely, utterly alone with the demons inside your head.
That reframes the entire setting. Her wealth and status aren't a shield. They are the walls of her prison.
A gilded cage.
Yes. And speaking of demons, her internal guilt is perfectly mirrored by the external cosmic threat she inherits. We need to dig into the villain's wiki data provided in our sources to unpack the specific mechanics of the monstrosity, which is the official canonical name for the entity in the credits.
The monstrosity's modus operandi is deeply disturbing because it is not animalistic. A shark or a zombie kills because it is hungry or driven by biological instinct.
Oh, animalist.
Right. But the wiki classifies the Smile entity as omnimalevolent, highly intelligent, and inherently sadistic. It acts like a psychological torturer. It relies on trauma, empowerment, and false reality imprisonment.
It enjoys it.
It doesn't just want to consume the host. It actively enjoys mocking them, breaking down their sense of reality piece by piece.
And it achieves this breakdown through incredibly cruel shape-shifting. It doesn't just appear as a generic monster, it takes the form of the people Sky trusts the most.
Using her own mind against her.
Exactly. It appears as her overbearing mom, her estranged best friend Gemma, her dead boyfriend Paul. It weaponizes her specific grief against her, and it possesses the ability to multi-shapeshift.
The dancer scene.
Yes. There is a deeply unsettling scene where it appears as all of Sky's backup dancers simultaneously, slowly closing in on her in the claustrophobia of her apartment.
Because the entity exists entirely within the host's mind, its shape-shifting is essentially an illusionary dominance over perception. It controls the dashboard of the victim's senses.
That's terrifying.
During a dance rehearsal, it makes Sky hallucinate that her leg snaps and breaks in the exact same gruesome way it did in the car crash. She collapses, feeling the agonizing, blinding physical pain of the bone breaking, even though in reality her leg is perfectly fine.
But the pain is real to her.
Because the brain dictates pain, and the entity controls the brain.
If standard horror monsters are physical predators, like the xenomorph and alien dropping from the ceiling, the Smile entity is a psychological hacker.
A great way to put it.
It doesn't need to break down the physical door to your house. It rewrites your brain's operating system so that you can no longer trust your own eyes, your own ears, or even your own pain receptors. There is nowhere to hide when the threat is rendering your reality.
And when it finally strips away the illusions and reveals its true form to the host right before possession, the visual design is staggering.
The descriptions in the wiki are wild.
They are. It is described in the sources as 12 feet tall, entirely skinless, with multiple smiling human mouths nested inside one another, beady round eyes with unique streak-like patterns, and incredibly long, curled fingers on half-flayed hands.
It is a total nightmare aesthetic, but there is an incredible subtle detail noted in the sources regarding its appearance. It is physically much larger in the second film than it was when we saw it at the end of the first film. It grew. Why?
This detail fuels a prominent and terrifying theory that the entity is, at its core, a soul collector.
Oh.
The villain's wiki notes that in manic drawings made by a previous victim in the first film, human faces are shown embedded all over the creature's body. It doesn't just kill its hosts and move on, it consumes their consciousness to grow stronger.
So that's why it's bigger.
The fact that it is twice as large when confronting Sky implies it has been feeding well. Furthermore, if you listen closely during the credits of both films, the anguished, eternal screams of the past victims, which now includes Sky, can be heard echoing beneath the music.
It eternally traps them in a state of terror.
It's not just a horrific death sentence, it's literal eternal damnation.
Okay, so we understand the monster's mechanics, and we understand the fragile psychology of the victim. The crucial question now is execution. How does the director, Parker Finn, make the audience sitting in a movie theater feel the disorientation of Sky's descent into madness?
How do you simulate a psychological hacking?
Exactly. And the answer loops us right back to the very first segment of our deep dive, the audio design.
The sonic architecture of dread. Smile 2 utilizes sound in a highly innovative, aggressive way. We have an article from Christina Escamilla analyzing the film's specific audio techniques, and it highlights the brilliant, abrasive fusion of highly produced pop culture and industrial horror soundscapes.
The commitment to the bit is incredible. Naomi Scott, who is a talented singer in real life, actually recorded and released a real 6-track EP for the film called the Sky Riley EP.
Like a legitimate pop release.
It was officially put out by Interscope Records. It features massive, genuine pop songs like New Brain and Blood on White Satin. The marketing campaign even set up fake stan accounts on social media and put up massive real-world billboards in major cities for this entirely fictional singer.
And the visual influences for her onstage performances are meticulously researched. Finn studied the legendary Bob Fosse for the sharp rhythm and precision of the choreography.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and drew heavily from the aesthetics of artists like Lady Gaga, Britney Spears, and FKA Twigs to create a wholly authentic, hyper-stimulating pop star environment.
But intertwined beneath that glittering, booming pop music is ambient terror. The sound designer utilizes indistinct whispering, scratching off-screen sounds, and a subtle layer of white noise that borders on the subliminal.
Just constantly messing with your ears.
They play with the frequencies so the audience constantly feels like they're hearing things just out of reach, perfectly mirroring Sky's own rising paranoia.
It creates a deeply disorienting theater experience. By placing the subliminal horror audio underneath the booming bass of a pop track, The audio mix blurs the line between reality and hallucination for the audience,
Simulating the possession.
replicating the exact sensory overload the entity is inflicting on Sky.
But I have to question the mechanics of that vision. Pop music is, by its very definition, structurally engineered to be fun, catchy, and upbeat. A song like New Brain sounds like a massive club banger.
It does, yeah.
How does blasting an upbeat, major-key pop track into a theater actually enhance a terrifying atmosphere? Doesn't a catchy hook kill the suspense?
On the contrary, it weaponizes your expectations through juxtaposition.
Okay, break that down for me.
If an entire horror movie is scored with traditional, dreary, dissonant violin music, your brain adapts. You become numb to the dark atmosphere. But by inserting bright, sterile, highly produced pop music, the director creates a violent, jarring clash with the bloody, chaotic reality of a demonic possession.
Taking away the safety.
Exactly. The familiar, comforting, commercial sounds of a pop song are corrupted. It removes any safe harbor for the audience. The upbeat rhythm that your brain inherently wants to dance to is now serving as the soundtrack to a woman screaming and tearing her own hair out.
It creates a sickening cognitive dissonance.
It's taking the safest, most commercial sound in the world and turning it into a threat.
And that constant audio disorientation, the inability to trust what you are hearing, perfectly sets up the film's devastating narrative twist. It proves the entity's most famous chilling quote from the franchise.
You cannot escape your own mind.
Exactly, the grand illusion. This is where the film ruthlessly pulls the rug out from under not just the protagonist, but the entire audience. As the plot progresses, Skye becomes increasingly isolated and desperate.
Running out of options.
She manages to reconcile with her estranged best friend, Gemma, begging her for help. To hide from the paparazzi and the entity, she goes to a remote wellness retreat with her mother. But while there, her mother suddenly stops speaking, turns to her with that horrific smile, violently smashes a mirror, and brutally stabs herself to death with a massive glass shard.
It is a completely traumatizing, blood-soaked scene.
So Skye flees the retreat in terror, meets up with Gemma, and they steal a car to drive into the city to meet a man named Morris. Morris is an ER nurse who has been secretly tracking the entity ever since it infected and killed his brother.
And Morris actually has a plan.
A crazy plan, but a plan.
He believes the parasite is biologically tied to the host. If the host's body dies, the parasite dies. So he proposes they break into an abandoned Pizza Hut, use the industrial walk-in freezer to drastically lower Skye's body temperature to prevent permanent brain damage, deliberately stop her heart with a chemical injection to starve the entity, and then immediately resuscitate her.
It is a desperate, clinical, scientific attempt to outsmart an ancient supernatural curse. It gives the audience a glimmer of mechanical hope.
Right, like maybe they can logic their way out of this.
Right. So she's in the stolen car with Gemma, speeding through the night to the Pizza Hut. And then, Skye's cell phone rings. She looks down at the caller ID, and it says Gemma.
It is a truly chilling cinematic moment. The realization hits the audience at the exact same time it hits Skye.
Skye slowly answers the phone, and the real Gemma's voice comes through the speaker, confused, saying she hasn't spoken to Skye in days and asking why she's calling.
And then she looks over.
Skye, slowly, terrified, looks over at the passenger seat. The Gemma, sitting right next to her, the person she has been confiding in, driving with, and relying on for days, slowly turns her head and gives her that horrific, wide smile.
It was the entity the entire time.
This single realization completely shatters the narrative architecture of the film.
It really does. It means that almost everything we, the audience, have watched unfold over the past hour was a complete fabrication generated by the entity.
Her mother's brutal suicide at the retreat, a hallucination.
The reality is that Skye, lost in a fugue state controlled by the demon, actually stabbed her own mother to death while hallucinating the suicide.
Despite the crushing despair of that revelation, she still manages to make it to the Pizza Hut freezer to meet Morris. She believes stopping her heart is her only way out. Morris leaves the room for a split second to get the resuscitation equipment.
And that's when it happens.
The instant he's gone, the entity appears. It takes the form of Skye herself from the night of her car crash, bloody, mangled, and mocking. Skye fights her own hallucination, manages to grab the syringe off the counter, and violently injects herself, stopping her own heart.
She collapses to the floor. She thinks she's won.
She thinks she starved it.
But the entity simply laughs. Standing over her paralyzing body, it adopts Skye's own voice and mockingly tells her, "You are not in control, Skye. I am."
And this is where the visual execution made my jaw drop in the theater. As she lies dying on the floor, the dirty, frost-covered walls of the Pizza Hut freezer literally begin to dissolve and fade away.
The ultimate twist.
The lighting drastically shifts from cold blue to blinding spotlights. The audio track explodes with the deafening roar of a massive crowd. Sky is suddenly standing upright, wearing a glittering costume, center stage at Madison Square Garden, which is fictionalized as Herald Square Garden in the film.
It is the opening night of her massive world tour.
She looks out into the sea of screaming fans and sees her mother, Elizabeth, standing in the front row, alive and well, looking up at her with concern. The devastating truth locks into place.
The entire horrific week.
The escape to the retreat, her mother's death, reconciling with Gemma, finding Morris the freezer.
It was all an impossibly elaborate, nested hallucination. It was designed to keep Sky's consciousness distracted and exhausted, while the entity piloted her physical body through the motions of rehearsing, doing press, and preparing for the concert.
The entity essentially put her mind in a terrifying waiting room while it drove her physical body to the largest possible venue.
Just waiting for the curtain to go up.
Standing on stage, the entity physically rips its way out of the stomach of Sky's hallucinated past self. It towers over her in its full 12-foot multi-mouth true form. Sky's mind finally breaks.
She falls into a catatonic trance, staring up at the monster only she can see.
The entity dives into her mouth, fully possessing her. And then, to the absolute horror of the in-universe audience, Sky turns to the crowd, smiles that horrific, unnatural smile, and violently, fatally stabs herself through the eye with her microphone.
If we pause to analyze the mathematical implications of this ending, they are globally staggering. We know the unbreakable rules of the parasite.
The curse passes via the trauma of witnessing the suicide.
Right. Joel passed it to one person in a drug den. The Brazilian man passed it to one person. Sky Riley just committed a deeply traumatizing, gruesome, highly visible suicide center stage in an arena packed with tens of thousands of screaming fans.
And because she's a global pop star making a highly anticipated comeback, there are presumably hundreds of thousands, if not millions more, watching the tragedy unfold live on social media streams or concert broadcasts.
Exactly. The ending takes the intimate, localized horror of the first film and scales it up into a weapon of mass destruction.
It sets up the inevitability of Smile 3 not as a story about a single haunting, but as a global, apocalyptic pandemic of the mind.
The entity didn't just win a battle against Sky, it executed a flawless strategy to infect the world. It hit the absolute jackpot of trauma distribution.
It is an incredibly bleak, brilliant narrative pivot. But the impact of that ending wasn't just felt by the fictional fans screaming in Herald Square Garden. It resonated massively in the real world. Let's examine the real-world footprint of this film, touching on the production realities and the profound meta-context the director intended.
The film was an undeniable, runaway financial triumph for Paramount. In an era where box office returns are often unpredictable, Smile 2 was made for a very modest $28 million, and it grossed over $138 million globally.
That is a massive return on investment.
Industry trackers calculated a massive net profit, and it achieved significant critical success too, holding an 86% on Rotten Tomatoes.
And what's truly impressive to me is that they achieved that terrifying climax without relying entirely on pixels. The creature effects for the giant entity at the end were largely practical.
Practical effects are coming back in a big way.
It was cited in production notes as the biggest physical creature build for a horror film since the xenomorph queen in Aliens. They filmed the movie in the Hudson Valley in New York, and it actually caused a significant local uproar because the production team completely shut down U.S. Highway 209 to film the visceral car crash flashbacks.
Real-world traffic jams and logistical nightmares, all to perfectly engineer a supernatural terror.
But beyond the impressive logistics and the box office returns, there is a profound, intentional meta-commentary woven into the very fabric of the film's success. The horror isn't just about what happens to the character, it's about why we are watching it happen.
I noticed this parallel while going through the sources. The film's massive success reflects something deeply uncomfortable about our actual real-world culture.
What do you mean?
We have an insatiable appetite for watching the breakdown of celebrities. We consume their trauma, their mental health struggles, and their public failures as if it were pure entertainment.
Oh, absolutely. Tabloid culture.
Sky Riley's pain was a lucrative product for her fictional record label. But it was also literally a product for us. We bought tickets, sat in the dark, and ate popcorn, while we watch this woman suffer a complete psychological collapse.
And that dynamic is not an accident. Director Parker Finn has been very explicit about this intention in his interviews. He specifically designed the visual framing of the climax with the real-world audience in mind.
The shot at the end.
Yes. When Skye is standing on stage looking out at the horror-struck fictional audience in the arena, Finn positioned the camera so that the fictional audience is staring directly through the lens, making eye contact with the real-world audience sitting in the movie theater.
Oh, wow. The fictional witnesses are looking at the real witnesses.
Precisely. Finn wanted to ask a deeply provocative question of the viewer. Are we complicit in this violence? Did our financial demand as an audience for a Smile sequel force this character, Skye Riley, to be birthed into this nightmare?
By demanding more entertainment, by wanting to be scared again, did we essentially summon the entity back to torture a new victim, simply for our weekend amusement?
That is deeply unsettling. The movie is actively judging the viewer for buying a ticket to see it. It makes you part of the cycle.
It is the ultimate blockbuster evolution of the lore framing device we discussed at the very beginning.
No, connecting it back.
It takes an abstract philosophical idea, our societal complicity in the consumption of human trauma, and wraps a horrifying, visceral story around it, only to connect the gruesome conclusion directly back to the viewer's own behavior at the end. It closes the loop on reality.
So, tracing our steps back through this journey, we started with the intimate, typed instructions of a podcast horror script analyzed on Reddit, exploring how pacing, bureaucratic grounding, and character voice create a psychological Trojan horse.
Building the foundation.
We looked at the meticulous character building of a traumatized, code-switching protagonist holding desperately onto a fragile pop star shell. And we followed the mechanics of that manipulation all the way to a blockbuster sensory assault that uses corrupted pop music and deep-nested, unreliable narration to completely shatter our comfort zones.
The architecture of fear is universal. The underlying blueprints are the same. We just keep finding more immersive, terrifying ways to build the house.
The next time you listen to a scary story on a podcast, or sit in a dark theater to watch a horror movie, or honestly, even just look at a celebrity pasting on a fake, exhausted smile for a late-night talk show, try to pay attention to the architecture underneath the surface.
Notice the sound design in the room.
Notice the framing of the narrative. Look for the invisible tricks that are meticulously designed to bypass your logic and inject dread straight into your nervous system.
And if we're thinking about invisible systems that feed on human behavior, it raises one final, terrifying parallel to consider.
What's that?
We've talked about the Smile entity as a virus that spreads by forcing people to witness trauma. It hijacks a host, uses their pain to capture the attention of an audience, and then infects that audience.
That sounds uncomfortably familiar.
Think about the recommendation algorithms that govern our social media feeds. How do they keep us engaged? By prioritizing outrage, tragedy, and conflict.
Oh, wow.
The algorithm acts exactly like the entity. It is an invisible, non-human architecture that identifies our anxieties, traps us in an endless scroll of customized distress, and forces us to witness the trauma of others to ensure its own continual growth.
It is a digital parasite that survives by making sure we never look away.
Exactly. So
Right.
the monster isn't just on the movie screen or the podcast script. We might be carrying the architecture of terror around in our pockets every day.
Something to think about the next time you feel the urge to keep scrolling in the dark.